Hello, and welcome back to the Former Review. Today, we'll be having a very special episode where we'll be looking at 3 different films. Now sit back, grab your drinks, and let's talk about these movies.
What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the Formal Review. This is Season 3, Episode 46, and I thank you all for tuning in once again. So we are now in award season, and there are a lot of movies to be seen. So every year, I watch all the films that have been nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, and then all the acting categories. I sometimes also watch the screenplay movies if there's time, or if there's only 1 or 2 that I haven't seen. So now the films haven't been nominated yet, but there are good indication of which films are going to be nominated for these awards. So because this list is so big, I usually only have a month to put out my analyses on these movies, and so I decided to increase the amount of films covered in each episode, at least up till that point, to 3. And I thank everyone for participating in the polls and reached out to me to help me make this decision. So in this episode, I will only provide a quick update to my collection, then I will be covering the movies Mank, One Night in Miami, and Promising Young Woman. So stay tuned. Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? When I was trying to get this podcast off the ground, I had a lot of questions, like how do I record an episode? How do I get my show into all the apps that people like to listen on? How do I make money from my podcast? The answer to every single one of those questions is really simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing my podcast. And best of all, it's absolutely 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with some great sponsors. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's exactly what I'm doing right now. So if you've always wanted to start a podcast and make money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. Again, that's anchor.fm/start. And I can't wait to hear your podcast. So the only 4K upgrade that I made in the past week was for the Andy Serkis Planet of the Apes trilogy, which are all fake 4K, meaning they all have 2K digital intermediates. However, this upgrade came at $5 a movie, which is a pretty good sale if you ask me. I love these movies, and together they make up one of the best trilogies of all time, next to The Godfather if you include The Coda and Lord of the Rings. But you probably don't care about that, so let's get talking about Mank, One Night in Miami, and Promising Young Woman. But before I get into these movies, let me preface everything with a slight spoiler warning. I will do my best not to ruin the movies for you, and as always, definitely watch the films first before you hear what I have to say about it so you fully understand anything. But if you do not care about that, keep listening. Also, no, I talk about this at the end, but the data shows that most people skip over that part. So I do want to reiterate the importance of leaving reviews on your favorite podcast service, because those reviews really help me grow and improve. A lot of you have talked to me offline, but I do really appreciate the reviews that already are out there. If everyone could just continue doing that, or letting me know any way that you think that I could grow and make this more entertaining, feel free, and I'll look at them and I'll grow as such. So if you haven't tuned in before, what I try to do in each of my analyses is to kind of look at 5 things that make up a good film. And I haven't really been explicit about this before, but I think it's an important thing to include going forward. So these 5 things are story, characters, the details such as the score, direction, etc., the themes and messages of the film, and then the ending. And then analyze how these 5 things actually take place in the film. How does all of these things affect the story? How does the theme work with the character? And these 5 things are what makes up a good movie, objectively speaking. But if some of these things aren't integrated well into each other, then the film suffers. And that's what a film analysis is, and that's how I'm going to be progressing with how I look at these movies going forward, not only just giving my opinion about them. So now on to the movies at hand. And if you don't care about one or the other, feel free to skip ahead to about the 4.5-minute mark for Mank, to about the 8-minute mark for One Night in Miami, and the 33-minute mark for Promising Young Woman. Or if you want to listen to all 3, let's sit back, relax, grab your drinks, and let's talk about these movies. Mank Mank is a biographical drama about screenwriter Herman J. Mankiewicz and his development of the screenplay for 1941's Citizen Kane. It is directed by David Fincher and based on the screenplay by his late father, Jack Fincher, and stars Gary Oldman in the title role, along with Amanda Seyfried, Lily Collins, Arliss Howard, Tom Pelphrey, Sam Troughton, Ferdinand Kingsley, Tuppence Middleton, Tom Burke, Joseph Cross, Jamie McShane, Toby Leonard Moore, Monica Gossman, and Charles Dance. So Jack Fincher wrote this script in the 1990s, and David originally wanted to make the film after he completed 1997's The Game, starring Kevin Spacey and Jodie Foster as the leads. Obviously, this never came to fruition, and Jack Fincher died in 2003. So Citizen Kane is a drama film directed by Orson Welles, and it is widely considered to be one of the greatest films ever made. And I'm not going to give my full analysis of that film here, but in short, it does a lot of innovative and precedent-setting techniques. It won Academy Award for Best Writing, for Original Screenplay, and it is constantly praised for its cinematography, its editing, Bernard Herrmann's music, and its narrative structure. Now, Mank shows Mank reflecting on his relationship with newspaper mogul William Randolph Hearst, on whom Kane is based. And there's also this story here about the abuse of power and also the power of propaganda during a California governor election. And Mank himself is a somewhat problematic person to deal with, but he's very smart and eloquent, and Oldman does a fantastic job playing this man, and the dialogue has a lot of clever one-liners. Also, the score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross is really, really good. Fincher is able to take his audience to what old Hollywood must have really felt like, and also what it looked like. The way it uses the black and white aspects really places you in this environment. However, the film does not really have this full grasp on what really happened, even though it does have moments of authenticity. The biggest deviation is that Mankiewicz never really gave Thalberg the inspiration to make the fake news reels, and Mankiewicz is broken up when Upton Sinclair loses the election, and the film implies that he's kind of distraught over it, and this is what gives him the driving force to writing Citizen Kane and essentially creating the movie's negative connotation of Hearst, which is completely false. As this is sort of the point of the movie, it definitely makes the whole thing feel unnecessary. Yes, it has great acting, fantastic direction, and an amazing score and look. However, the story was absolutely boring to me and frankly had me looking at the clock a lot. It does have a lot of great things, but it's not something I would be willing to watch again. This biopic did very little for me personally, but if this is a film that you enjoy, I get that. It is an interesting character study that illuminates basically a time and place, and really a classic film, but I won't be watching it again anytime soon. Now let's fast forward from the 1930s to the 1960s, specifically February 1964 in Miami. One Night in Miami is a drama film about a fictionalized meeting of Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, and Sam Cooke in a room at the Hampton House in February 1964 to celebrate Ali's surprise title win over Sonny Liston. It is the first film directed by Regina King from a screenplay by Kemp Powers based on his stage play of the same name. It stars Kingsley Ben-Adir, Eli Gorey, Alice Hodge, and Leslie Odom Jr. in the lead roles, along with Joaquina Kalukango, Nicolette Robinson, Beau Bridges, and Lance Reddick in supporting roles. Powers' original play was 1 act and 90 minutes and was first performed in 2013. He won the Ted Schmidt Award for Outstanding World Premiere of a New Play, and it also won 3 LA Drama Critics Circle Awards, 4 NAACP Theater Awards for Best Playwright, Best Director, Best Ensemble Cast, and Best Producer, and the LA Weekly Theater Award for Playwriting and Direction. Powers also wrote and directed Pixar's Soul, and in a 2013 essay, he said, and I quote, "This play is simply about one night, 4 friends, and many pivotal decisions that can happen in a single revelatory evening." So here we have revolutionary Malcolm X, singer-songwriter Sam Cooke, athlete and actor Jim Brown, and fighter Muhammad Ali, then still going by Cassius Clay, getting together in a small hotel room on the night of February 25th, 1964. So, historically speaking, not much is really known what was actually said in that room, as kind of everything everything going on in the 1960s overshadowed everything, and even Powers himself said that it was hard to get more than perfunctory information about what happened that night. So pretty much this entire play is speculation. But even so, it's more than just fan fiction. Instead, it's this love letter to these four men and what they stood for, and their fight for civil rights. There are some true aspects, such as Jim Brown really did want to go to a big party, in contrast to Malcolm's and Clay's plan for a quiet evening, and also Malcolm really did offer vanilla ice cream in opposition to booze because of his faith. To give a more well-rounded history lesson, Jim Brown at this time was 28 and was the Cleveland Browns star running back and was widely thought as American football's greatest players. This remains true to this day. He was a Pro Bowl invitee every season he was in the league and was recognized as the MVP 3 times and won the championships with the Browns in 1964. He led the league in rushing in 8 of his 9 seasons. He carried the ball a little over 2,300 times for about 12,000 rushing yards and 106 touchdowns, which were all records when he retired. He averaged about 104 rushing yards per game and is the only player in NFL history to average over 100 rushing yards per game for his entire career. His 5.2 yards per rush is the second best among running backs of all time. He was then enshrined in the Hall of Fame in 1971 and was named to the NFL's 50th anniversary all-time team, the NFL 75th anniversary all-time team, and the NFL 100th anniversary all-time team, which essentially comprises players in all of NFL history. The second guy was 30-year-old Sam Cooke. He was one of the biggest pioneers when it came to bringing gospel and R&B to the mainstream audience before shifting gears a little bit to getting more chart-topping pop hits that he's known for. He worked his way up essentially from the barons of the Deep South to the big city, gained a huge audience, took the ownership of his own masters, and then pushed more black artists to produce music. He eventually became known as the King of Soul, and his contributions to soul music has contributed to the rise of a few minor artists, Aretha Franklin, Al Green, Curtis Mayfield, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, Otis Redding, and James Brown. So no big deal. Now Malcolm X is the 30-year-old black nationalist minister, and at this point he was having issues with the Nation of Islam. He had only learned a little bit beforehand that the nation's leader Elijah Muhammad had fathered several children out of wedlock. Now Elijah Muhammad also had issues with Malcolm, who made some disparaging following John F. Kennedy's November 1963 assassination.
When you send your chickens out in the morning from your barnyard, those chickens will return that evening to your barnyard, not your neighbor's barnyard. I think this is a prime example of the devil's chickens coming back home to roost.
While definitely taken out of context,
that assassination was the result of the climate of hate. Only I said the chickens came home to roost, and which means the same thing. Climate of hate means that this is the result of something. And when I said chickens coming home to roost, I said the same thing.
But you did not say that you were glad the president was killed.
No, that's what the press said. What would I look like saying that I'm glad the president was killed?
And because of this, Malcolm was barred from speaking publicly on behalf of the nation. So he thought at the time that if he could bring a huge name to the nation, he would somewhat be forgiven. So he was looking around, and eventually Malcolm and Cassius Clay met in 1962 and then became close friends. And then on February 25th, 1964, Clay was to fight Sonny Liston, who was favored 7-1 to retain his title, and Clay beat him.
The greatest thing that ever lived. Great, I don't have a mark on my face, and I upset Sonny Liston, and I just turned 22 years old. I must be the greatest. Right. I told the world I had him going in 8th, but the man stopped it just to keep from making me look so great. He wanted to go to heaven, so I took him in 7. I am the king of the world.
And this story brings together these four minds and dissects their multiple approaches to the civil rights movement. With the win and Clay's subsequent elevation in status after this, Malcolm believed that his protege was ready to move to a more important call, the civil rights movement. And even though Jim Brown was not a member of the nation, according to Randy Roberts and Johnny Smith's Blood Brothers, The Fatal Friendship Between Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, Brown agreed with Malcolm that Clay's new heavyweight title was, quote, not an end in itself, but a platform from which to advance far more urgent matters, end quote. Brown himself was a very skeptic of passive resistance and the effectiveness of nonviolent protesting. And additionally, Malcolm actually made the same appeal to Cooke, essentially bashing bashing him by saying that he, quote, for his lack of political commitment and criticizing him for courting white audience through frivolous love songs, end quote. And Malcolm's views toward the other three men essentially comment on more when you look at people of the non-white ethnicity in the art space, and critics questioning whether their works should be only looked at through the eyes of social justice or just as art. But it's kind of failing to recognize the value of these different approaches to civil rights. And this is why this play and movie succeed. This story brings together these four minds and dissects their multiple approaches to the civil rights movement. And to see them debate the most effective means of achieving equality for African Americans is both powerful and thought-provoking. It is able to bounce around these multiple views of how to approach the movement.
Sam, you have possibly one of the most effective, beautiful outlets of us all. You're not using it to help the cause, bro.
Hell, I'm not. I got the masters to my songs. Started a label. I'm producing tons of black artists. Don't you think my determining my creative and business destiny is every bit as inspiring to people as you standing up on a podium trying to piss them off?
Oh, no, Kenneth.
Look around.
Let him
Look
finish.
around. Which one of us don't belong?
Don't belong. Brother Sam, the only person here white people seem to like, that would be you.
And additionally, this taps into one of Malcolm's biggest problems because his experience with racial prejudice comes from both black and white people, which again shows the extent that racism and prejudice is ingrained in society. Malcolm's father spent his days working to help black people support themselves and return to Africa. And he's one of the last people that you would expect to hold prejudicial views. However, he treated Malcolm better because he had the lighter skin. And Malcolm had experiences throughout his life, such as being elected class president as a kid because he had lighter skin and the children could accept him more. But at the same time, the school also discouraged him from becoming a lawyer.
The important thing is to be realistic. We all like you here, you know that. But you're a nigger, and a lawyer is no realistic goal for a nigger.
But why, Mr. Ostrowski? I get the best grades in class. I got voted class president. I want to be a lawyer.
Now, I want you to think about something that you can be. You're good with your hands, making things. People would give you work. I would myself. Why don't you become a carpenter? That's a good profession for a color.
And his experience is similar but also different from somebody who looks more like Jim Brown.
What do you mean?
You are yellow as the sun. When I think about who the most outspoken consequences big damn brothers out there are, it's all you light-skinned boys. You know, you, W.E.B. Du Bois, Adam Clayton Powell.
I never pay any attention to complexions, Jimmy, because we are all black people.
You know we are all far from the same. You know. Light-skinned cats get it harder from black people sometimes than they do from the white people.
And this again goes into the idea of how there are multiple ways to approach the civil rights movement. And Cook's idea is making the case for affecting change from within an unjust system instead of attacking it like Malcolm does. And this debate that they have is entirely of Powers' imagination. Now, these types of debates do happen in real life as well, but the writer told IndieWire that it was essentially inspired from when he was working as the only person of color in the Star Trek Discovery's writing room. He asked himself, quote, how much do I have to sacrifice to be accepted to be in this environment and in this world? And his psyche was split right down the middle, end quote. And he put these arguments basically back into the mouths who inspired that way of thinking. So a year after this story's events, only 2 of the 4 men were still alive. Clay publicly confirmed his ties to the Nation of Islam for the first time and then changed his name to Muhammad Ali.
Cassius Clay was my slave name. I'm no longer a slave. Muhammad means worthy of all praises and Ali means most high.
And by identifying himself as a convert to the Nation of Islam, Islam, he essentially attracted real hatred from both white and African Americans alike. White Americans didn't like him because he denounced America and denounced integration, and then many African Americans didn't like him because he wasn't a Christian. And as he became more invested in the nation, Ali's friendship with Malcolm kind of fell apart. And the last time they saw each other was in May of 1964 when Malcolm attempted to greet his former friend during a visit to Ghana. However, at the time, Malcolm didn't know that they weren't friends, and he tries to greet him, but then Muhammad Ali turns around and says, quote, "Brother Malcolm, you shouldn't have crossed the Honorable Elijah Muhammad," end quote, and then walked away. And they never reconciled after this. However, Ali in 1975 rejected the nation in favor of Sunni Islam, which was the same denomination that Malcolm embraced after his departure from the nation as well. And then he stated in 2004 that, quote, "Turning my back on Malcolm was one of the mistakes that I regret most in my life," end quote. Because almost exactly a year after the Clay Liston fight, Malcolm was assassinated under still undetermined circumstances. His autobiography, based on interviews with journalist Alex Haley, was then released posthumously in October of 1965. I would highly recommend anyone listening to read. It's extremely insightful into Malcolm X himself, learning from where he started and where he ended up. If you don't like reading books, you can also go watch the Spike Lee Malcolm X movie, because that takes a lot of inspiration from the autobiography. Anyway, so about 2 months prior to Malcolm's assassination, Cook was also killed. Cook sustained a fatal gunshot wound during an altercation with a Los Angeles motel manager. Though authorities ruled the shooting a justifiable homicide, there are still questions around this incident. Now, only one of those men remain around today, because Ali died in 2016 after a decades-long struggle with Parkinson's disease. Prior to his death, Ali was known for being a humanitarian and also a philanthropist. He focused on practicing his Islamic duty of charity and good deeds, donating millions to charity organizations and disadvantaged people of all religious backgrounds. The impact that this man has had on the world is immense. If you want to hear more about that, please go check out Season 3, Episode 15, the June History Special, where we discuss the 2001 Michael Mann film Ali, starring Will Smith. So today, only Jim Brown is alive. Within the year after this eventful night, Brown started filming the movie The Dirty Dozen, and then officially retired from football. And he spent the next several decades balancing acting with activism. Now, Brown played collegiately in New York and then professionally in Ohio, which are both northern states, but they both had the infamous Jim Crow laws that existed in the United States between 1876 and 1965, and they mandated de jure segregation in public facilities with a supposedly, quote, separate but equal, end quote, status for Americans of African descent. And in reality, this led to the treatment that African Americans were inferior than those who were of European descent, and systematically giving them a number of economic, educational, and social disadvantage. Now, generally speaking, segregation and discrimination were outlawed by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And African Americans were still experiencing daily discrimination. So while his obstacles that he had aren't as heavily documented as those, for example, Jackie Robinson faced, it's naive to think that he faced no adversity as a black football player during the 1960s. I want to point out one specific scene of this because it leads into this idea that this guy that Jim Brown is interacting with is a nice man. He's giving him compliments.
I, for one, think that you are a credit not only to this community, but to the entire state of Georgia. I've never been prouder to say that I live on St. Simon's Island than I am now, a place where the great Jim Brown is from. If there's ever anything I can do for you, you should never hesitate to reach out.
But then, at the end, you hear this.
Moving some furniture?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you should let me help you with that.
So considerate of you, Jimmy, but you know we don't allow niggas in the house.
So when you go back and listen to these lines of dialogue,
our families go way back. Been looking after one another since the first folks settled on this island.
it really shows that even if he's known to being one of the best American football players in the entire country, he's still treated like this. But this guy does think
it really is wonderful to see you, son. You keep up the good work. You was all proud.
So his definite racism is acceptable, right? Additionally, at this time, the NFL, like all other American professional leagues, was dominated by white people. Along with many other things, he founded the Black Economic Union, which used professional athletes as facilitators in the establishment of black-run enterprises, urban athletic clubs, and youth motivational programs. However, the film relies on a lot of this outside knowledge, and that's the issues with details does it have. Because if someone doesn't know the importance of these four men, the impact can be somewhat less for someone who does know everything, or knows at least the general idea of them. And Power's script is very dialogue heavily, which focuses on this short time period of a few hours. But it does use some flashbacks to show other events in the four protagonists' lives. But the film offers very few firm dates, aside from the very obvious ones, and that make this implication that this moment was what changed everything. And it also changes some of the timeline a little bit to make this impact a little bit more powerful. For example, Cook actually recorded the Bob Dylan inspired song prior to the Liston Clay fight, and Ali's declaration did not come the same night as the fight. And also, soul singer Jackie Wilson did not intentionally mess with the sound system during the Sam Cooke show in Boston. But the mischief that they showed in the movie was inspired by a real knack, but it was a playful sabotage when Wilson interrupted Cook trying to lip sync his song Cha Cha Cha. And the movie falsely portrays Cook's pre-1964 songs in order to make Change Gun Come seem like a bigger leap than it was. And it was influenced by Blowin' in the Wind. But with songs like Chain Gang, the song that he went a cappella with in the movie, Cook had already started making socially conscious songs that were well beyond just simple pop hits. February 25th, 1964 wasn't an epiphany night as they tried to show in the movie. One detail that Regina King does do here that is showing something about Malcolm that isn't displayed very often, and that's his love for photography. And in real life, Malcolm was known to carry around a camera, and showing his interest in creating these positive images for the Nation of Islam. And photographer Gordon Parks famously described Malcolm's approach to photography as, quote, collecting evidence, end quote, especially as he was traveling throughout the world. And the final scene in One Night in Miami is taken from a photo that has Malcolm with a camera in hand taking a picture of Ali from behind the bar. But even with the small issues with the film's details, it is still a phenomenal made movie. The script does allow for these four men to talk about these issues in a realistic way. The conversations honestly are very similar to what some of my friends do when we talk about political topics. The arguments can get very heated, but in the end we remain close and can still joke around with each other. All four actors do this wonderfully. One concern that I personally had going into this was Ben Adir's portrayal of Malcolm. Not so much due to his nationality, but more so for my love of Denzel's portrayal of the man. And I can happily say that I think he did a great job of capturing each part of Malcolm. Odom Jr. also plays Cook with ease and grace that really can make the viewer forget that he isn't Sam Cooke. And if you're wondering, yes, that really is him singing. It's not the exact same as Cook, but it's still pretty perfect. I really like the fact that he has made his way into film from the Broadway circuit, coming from Hamilton. Hodge as Jim Brown never really misses a beat, and to be this calm and collected voice of reason with these very contrasting points of view. And Glory is also great at Ali because he's not only able to capture Ali's charisma, but also give him a side that is not usually thought about. his innocence. He is the youngest of the group, and he shouts that he's the greatest, but yet next to these men, comparably, he's almost living in their shadow. He tries to sit there and listen and trying to be influenced by these three men around him. He eventually obviously does have his own voice in the struggle, at which we get glimpses of, but he hasn't formed them all yet. He's still trying to see his way. He still has a lot to learn about the movement. Interestingly, from the audience's point of view, they are Ali, which is, again, a really interesting way to look at something because Ali himself is known as this big, charismatic man. Yet, in this moment, he's the most relatable to anyone who doesn't know the struggles that these three other men go through, which is a really interesting take on Ali, who, again, is thought of being the greatest of all time. And you don't see this innocence. Regina King's direction is where this film really shines. She's able to keep all of these men equally on screen, and not one feels more overpowered than the other. Her directional eye captures the message from each one of them and keeps the audience glued to the screen from beginning to end. And this is really a fantastic directional debut for her, and I can't wait to see what more she does. Unlike Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, her work on this film shows how a play can be put on screen and not feel like a play. Not saying that Ma Rainey is a bad film by any means, but that was one of the biggest problems with it. Go check out season 3 episode 41 for my full thoughts on that film. In the end, this film felt absolutely saddening to me, knowing what happens to two of these men, especially Mank. Using Cook's song at the end of the film with him running from his burning house was very powerful. I knew that eventually he and Cook would meet tragic ends, and it really moved me to tears. Overall, even with its small historical inaccuracies and reliance on a lot of external factors, it has show-stopping performances, a great screenplay, masterful direction that will really bring you into the 1960s and see that not a lot has changed when it comes to civil rights. We have made a lot of progress, but we still have a long way to go. In 2020 alone, 989 people were shot and killed by police. Out of those 989 deaths, there were 434 white victims, 42%, 227 black victims, 23%, 156 Hispanic victims, 16%, 22 other victims, about 2%, and 161 unknown, which is 16%. And these numbers are awful to see from any aspect. And yes, all deaths are problematic. However, it's not the full picture of things, because black Americans encompass about 13.4% of the American population, whereas whites make up 76.5%. That means we have about 251 million white people and 44 million black people. That means in 2020 alone, the amount of white deaths due to police has a rate of 2 per 100,000 people, and the black death rate due to police is 6 per 100,000 people, which is 3 times more. And in this initial month of 2021, 30 people have been shot and killed by the police, 3 of which have been black and 6 of which have been white. When you do the math, the rates are about the same, and we are not even into a month of the year. In the year prior to the events of this movie, there were 111 reported police-related deaths for white Americans and 131 for non-white Americans, according to the CDC. The 1960 U.S. Census reported about 179 million people, with 179,000 being white and about 19,000 being black. After you do the math again, the police-related death rate for whites during this time was 40 per 100,000 people, and the police-related death rate for blacks was 1,000 per 100,000 people, which is 25 times higher. And yes, all of these deaths should not happen. Yes, that disparity has gone down from 25 times higher to 3 times higher, but that still does not take away the disparity between police-related deaths between black and white Americans. Like I said, it's progress, but we still have a long way to go. Now, after listening to that history lesson, let's get on to the final movie in this episode, Promising Young Woman. So, Promising Young Woman is a dark comedy thriller directed, written, and produced by Emerald Farrell and her featured directional debut. Margot Robbie also serves as producer, and it stars Carey Mulligan, Bo Burnham, Alison Brie, Clancy Brown, Jennifer Coolidge, Laverne Cox, and Connie Britton, and follows a woman who takes revenge against men who have wronged her. Okay, not gonna lie, this is one of my favorite movies so far this year. So in short, this film is daring, it has style, and it really gives an important message. It has a fantastic performance by Carey Mulligan along with great direction by Fennell. This film is an updated and realistic version of Kill Bill, and if that's not reason for you to watch this movie, I don't know what is. And to say any more is spoiler territory. Go watch it, end of story. Alright, so here's your spoiler warning. Anything following this bit is going to be spoilers, and I do suggest go watch the movie first before you hear this next part. Anyway, so I'm also going to be going into some adult topics in this analysis, and there may be some triggering ideas, so proceed with caution. So the protagonist in this film is Cassie, who's played by Mulligan, who ventures around the city's nightlife to seek out systematic revenge on toxic men. Yes, you heard that right. Toxic men. So what she does is pretend to be intoxicated, lures in these quote-unquote good guys who want to take advantage of her condition, and then gives out lessons on consent. What's her reason? And I'll cover that in a little bit. But in short, it's not only due to the systematic preference towards men. The movie says that she dropped out of med school after a mysterious traumatic event, which gradually reveals itself through the movie. Her parents, played by Brown and Coolidge, and even her boss, played by Cox, feel that she should be doing more with her life. Then, while working, an old med school friend, played by Burnham, comes into the coffee shop. He ends up asking her out, but she initially says no because of her wanting to continue her nightly missions. So kind of funny version of Batman here. He then returns later and tries again, and she lets her guard down a little bit and they start dating. He seemingly is a nice guy and maybe the one different guy who isn't bad. Cassie starts to open up to him more, but when she finds out that one man is back in town, she discovers her swan song, her last mission before riding off into the sunset. And this is what drives her. This one guy raped her best friend, Nina. And this left her so emotionally destroyed that Nina drops out of med school and then dies by suicide. And then this movie dives into how society has a preference towards men. And this message is even shown so much through the casting of the guys in this movie. Fennell chooses actors that don't look like the typical jocks or creepers that we're used to seeing in films. She casts these so-called good guys who you would think wouldn't take advantage of Cassie as she is feigning her drunkenness. The movie is really trying to show that no matter who the guy is, they have the potential to be a bad person. The men involved in this rape deny it, and the school protects them. And society has a preference for protecting young men who are usually white, educated, rich, and they have parents who can hire expensive lawyers to protect them from the consequences of their actions. And one specific example that brings to my mind is Brock Turner. For those who don't know who he is, he sexually assaulted an unconscious woman at Stanford University. He was convicted, however, he was only sentenced to a mere 6 months in jail, and his father complained that his son's life had been ruined for, quote, 20 minutes of action fueled by alcohol and promiscuity, end quote. His sentence also included 3 years probation for 3 felony counts of sexual assault, and according to the judge, quote, a prison sentence would have been a severe impact on him, and I think he will not be a danger to others, end quote. And the judge stated that, quote, obviously the prison sentence would have been a severe impact on him. The defendant is youthful and has no significant record of prior criminal offenses, end quote. Then he also said, quote, there is a less moral culpability attached to the defendant who is intoxicated, end quote. Essentially saying that because the swimmer was intoxicated at the time of the attack, he should be treated differently than a sober defendant. And the judge also noted that the news coverage surrounding this case had significantly impacted Turner, saying, quote, the media attention that has been given to this case has in a way sort of poisoned the lives of the people that have been affected. The question I've asked myself is state prison for this defendant an antidote to that poison? The judge relied heavily on letters that Turner's friends and family had sent in and read an excerpt from a former classmate who told the judge she couldn't believe the assault allegations. However, this letter also includes a very, very long rant that places blame on the woman for being attacked. Quote, "I'm sure she and Brock had been flirting at this party and decided to leave together. And I don't think it's fair to base the fate of the next 10 plus years of his life on the decision of a girl who doesn't remember anything but the amount she drank." End quote. The issue with this is because the judge made no mention of a letter signed by more than 250 Stanford students urging him to sentence Turner to at least the minimum years outlined in the state law. And in this letter they said, quote, "A light sentence such as a probation or a few months in jail would send the incorrect message that this is not a serious crime. This would undermine the trust in the legal system at large, diminish reporting, and possibly make the Stanford community a more dangerous place for all." End quote. So because this is such an intense topic to be talked about, let's establish some definitions here. Sexual assault involves crimes where offenders subject victims to any unwanted or offensive sexual contact. The term sexual violence encompasses sexual abuse, sexual assault, and rape. However, each of these terms differ state by state. For instance, a state may define both first-degree rape and first-degree sexual assault as engaging in sexual intercourse by force with a victim incapable of consent or with a person under the age of 14. On average, sexual assault occurs every 73 seconds in America. And according to the 2019 Association of American Universities 2019 AAU Campus Climate Survey on Sexual Assault and Misconduct, there is a 13% rate of non-consensual sexual contact in colleges. However, according to the Department of Justice, 80% of sexual violence goes underreported. They found that women tend to avoid filing reports out of fear of embarrassment, coupled with the notion that the police cannot do anything to help. So going back to the Turner case, his light sentencing only does further damage because it essentially says that even though you can get through a trial and even to manage to get a conviction, it won't be that serious. Unfortunately, this is not the only case of this, and it continues even up to the Supreme Court, but I'm not going to go into that here. My point here is to emphasize the concept that there is a systematic preference to defend men in a situation like this.
This consent thing is tricky. I hate to admit it, but I feel sorry for men. No! Women always blame themselves, and then the man never has to take responsibility. During Rape Prevention Week at school, all the signs are aimed at women. Girls, don't dress provocatively. Girls, don't walk alone. How about, hey, guys, don't rape?
And this eventually did lead to the Me Too movement, whose goal is to bring change to society for women who have been sexually abused or harassed. This movement has brought on courage for women who have been sexually assaulted to stand up and speak on their traumas. And though impactful, there has been some people who have taken advantage of this for their own benefit, such as the Amber Heard Johnny Depp situation. Now, I'm not trying to defend Depp here, as he did do some bad things as well. I'm also not saying that we shouldn't listen to Amber Heard, but she has been shown to lie multiple times, including committing perjury or lying under oath. And honestly, this is one of those unfortunate cases where the relationship is pretty toxic for both parties, and frankly, both of them should pay for it, however which way. The issue here is that only one of them has really paid for it so far, and that's Johnny Depp. It should have been an equal treatment to both and not one side get it blamed because a company is essentially overcompensating for things. This specific case is very complicated. You have to treat a lot of these things on a case-by-case basis, but we should listen no matter what to both sides of the story and defend one side and not even listen to the other side, no matter who's on which side. Though at this point, the majority of the people who haven't been listened to are women, so we should listen, but do investigation and try to understand everything that's going on before blindly believing in something like the people did in the movie White Lie. And yes, this is a shameless plug for that episode where I interviewed the directors of that film, so feel free to go check out season 3 episode 44. But this movie not only puts men on blast, but also the people who are complicit in their protection, which includes women, as the Turner case did. This film shows how society is interested in moving past traumas than dealing with them, because we see Cassie living, but she is far from the phrase alive and well. She forgets her 30th birthday. Nina's trauma and ultimate death puts a toll on Cassie, and because of this, she has to keep trying to show how nice guys shouldn't just get a pass because they're quote-unquote nice guys. And Cassie, as a character, is like the Greek priestess Cassandra. And for those who don't know Greek history, Cassandra was a Trojan priestess of Apollo in Greek mythology. She was cursed to utter true prophecies, but never to be believed. Cassie holds a mirror to those around her and to the audience, honestly. The movie is about assault and vengeance, and it's about a woman who refuses to accept the somewhat feeble hand of justice and basically sacrifices her own life, both figuratively and literally, to avenge her friend's rape because no one else will and nothing else matters. Through all of this, Fennel also shows a comedic yet realistic side of life. For example, Cassie uses YouTube videos to make her lips look bigger and then tells one quote nice guy that the novel he's been pitching to her actually sounds awful as she's about to walk out the door after revealing her secret. The entire film, Cassie is shown to get away with what she wanted to do. She even smashes the taillight and headlight of a pickup truck when a driver calls her every expletive you can imagine. Then that guy drives off afraid. I know I've felt this at times when it comes to road rage, and I can only imagine there are women out there who would see everything that Cassie did and think that they would want to do the same. As in real life, nothing of this is really possible because you can obviously have consequences because of it, but it is very tempting. And it really brings the story into this Greek tragic comedy. And as the name implies, this literary genre invokes tragedy based on human suffering that invokes an accompanied catharsis, and the comedy genre intended to be humorous and amusing by inducing laughter. And what keeps this film so down to earth and going full Kill Bill is through Cassie's relationship with Ryan. She stops this nighttime side hustle and does seem to be much happier. But because this isn't a romance movie, it's only a mask on real life and is a short happiness. Cassie recognizes a younger Ryan laughing along on the cell phone recording of Nina's rape. Then she blackmails him into telling her the location of the rapist's bachelor party. She then shows up dressed as a nightly nurse stripper and plans to teach him a lesson. But it doesn't get that far because he smothers her with a pillow for 2 minutes and 15 seconds while she is crying and a knee on her neck, all while he is crying like a baby. The sound here goes in and out that it almost makes you feel that you're under the pillow with Cassie. And similar to Thelma and Louise, it's seemingly that Cassie never really gets her full revenge. She knew that this could have led to her killing him as well. Maybe she intended not to. But then the film flips that on its head with its twist ending, which is really powerful because the audience is laughing a lot in this film. But then again, Fennel puts a mirror in front of our faces and shows us how people laughed at Nina's tape and really uses the comedy to tell this story, and how really anyone who's watching this is pretty much aligned with the Ryans of the world, who may not be bad people overall, but they're not doing anything about it. They're standing there laughing, which can give the audience really a lot to think about. And this is extremely genius by Fennel because it's using comedy in a way that you wouldn't expect. And again, going back to the Greek mythology, it's like the Trojan horse. It's in a disguise and you think it's doing one thing, but then at the end, nope, it's doing something completely different. As a society, we sit there and watch all these things happen, but don't do anything until they are dead. And then we act. We don't try to prevent something from happening. We react to something that happened. And this can be obviously applied to many, many, many different topics, but obviously the more specific here is violence against women is really underaddressed legally, and honestly, it shouldn't be allowed. So, in summary, this film has a great story, a great message. The acting is amazing by Mulligan. I really think she could get Best Woman Actor for this. The details, the direction, the use of how it uses comedy as a mirror to intertwine its message. Really shows the fantastic aspects of this movie. And then the ending, I mean, that is really such a great way to end a film. And that's why this movie has one of the strongest messages that I've seen tied within a film this year. This movie could get best direction and also best original screenplay. It's possible it could get even best picture, but I would definitely say best woman actor here. I would rewatch this film again and again. It was that good. And really, as of now, it is my favorite movie of the year so far. But we still have some more movies to watch. So, what did you think of these 3 movies? Let me know. Hit me up on social media. Former Review is on Facebook, Twitter, and the Gram. I post many things, including trailer reactions, so go check those out. The handle is all the same. It's at The Former Review. Feel free to also check out backseatdirectors.com, where I work with a big team to put out movie reviews and also editorials. Again, that's backseatdirectors.com. Please also subscribe to The Former Review. We're on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're now on Amazon Music, iHeartRadio. Honestly, pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast, we have our content there. Also, I'm always wanting to grow and improve, so please leave a review and what you want to hear, because I really do this for you all. I see the numbers, and I really appreciate everyone supporting me and talking to me about movies, because frankly, that's what it's all about. And for anyone who has supported me on a financial basis, thank you again. And if you want to help support on a financial basis, please go to anchor.fm/the-formal-review and click support this podcast. And honestly, any donation is appreciated. Thank you all again for tuning in. And until next time, wear your mask, wash your hands, stay safe, and take care, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Former Review. Cheers, and we'll see you next time.